We are doing our book to movie. We're going to watch the movie after we read the book on June 18th at 6:30 p.m. The book that we're doing is Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. Hi, come on in. And that's by Mao Cixi. And it's actually a semi-autobiographical novel. So this was during the Chinese Revolution. And it was where they were taking doctors' children, and they're taking them over into the country and making them work in mines and rice paddies and things like that to kind of get them into the communist way of life and situation. And what you find out in this book is sometimes when you're trying to teach someone something, they may bring something to the community instead. So they ended up teaching the community a lot more than they were taught in this thing. So that's what this book is about. You can sign up here. If you need the book, we have a few more copies, and just put yes, I want the book, and then you can read the book and come to the movie. Summer reading program is coming up. So we do an adult summer reading program here at the library. The theme this year is Libraries Rock. So we're going to have a lot to do with music and different things like that. So if you are interested at all, May 31st is our sign-up day. After that, you can sign up anytime after that for it. Adults are only really required to read 3 books. If you don't do it, it's not like we're going to punish you or anything. But really, to end the program, you really have to do 3 books between June and July. If you finish 3 books between June and July, we have the end of the summer reading program Carnival, and we will have Chad Elliott there to sing and entertain you. If you finish the program, you'll get a voucher for free food, and we'll have McCreary's there that are providing food. So it'll be fun. This year we are combining all ages at the end of the carnival. So we'll have kids playing in a bouncy house, and anyone can come, but you guys will get the free food if you finish the program. So that should be interesting. A few of the things that we are doing for summer reading program, I'm just going to go over a few of them that we're starting beginning in June to mid-June. We are going to bring back the do-it-yourself or the crafting club. And we are going to make CD coasters. So we're taking old CDs and we are putting some paper on them, and we're going to make them into colorful coasters for your summer table. So that is June 4th at 6:30 p.m. We also have Mike Anderson coming. He's known as the dulcimer guy. He's going to do a program at 2 o'clock for the kiddos, and then he's going to do a program for us, or all ages, at 6 o'clock, where he is going to be talking about Civil War music. And he's going to have examples of Civil War instruments that they played, and he will be doing Civil War songs. So it's going to be kind of a history thing with music and his knowledgeable aspect of everything. So he is coming Tuesday, June 7th, and 6 o'clock for the adults, 2 o'clock for the kids. And one more. Okay, she's pretty interesting. This is Hannah Cesario, and she is going to be doing a program called Jazz Standards for us here. And that is June 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. And what it is she plays the ukulele and she does jazz on it. So she sings. It's different, but I've listened to her, and it's actually pretty soothing and quite wonderful. So she sings the songs and plays the ukulele, and it is jazz. So it's going to be really interesting. All right.
Are those in your newsletter?
They will be. The newsletter, not in May, but the one coming out in June now. We're going to have everything from June to July, the whole summer reading program. So this is just the beginning. We have more coming in July, and then we have more coming in sort of the end of June, and then more coming in July. So we've got a lot of stuff going on for kids and adults and everything. So right now, we have Darcy Maulsby here, and she is Iowa's storyteller. So she is an author, and she's done many things in her life, and she's going to give us the program called Adventures in Iowa's Culinary History. So, thanks, Robin.
I commend all of you for coming out on such a beautiful night. I was sorely tempted to stay home and work in my garden, but then I thought, oh, I can't, I'm the speaker. No, I wouldn't want to miss the chance to be here tonight with you folks. I mean, we're talking food. Who'd want to miss that opportunity? So I am a marketer at heart, so if you like what you hear tonight, if you like Iowa food and Iowa stories, recipes, storytelling, feel free to sign up for my free email list. If you don't want to, it's okay. You won't hurt my feelings. But if you do, here's your opportunity. And come see me at the table afterwards. You can get a free bookmark. So, pretty cool. I wish I lived closer to Spencer, Robin. You have all kinds of neat things going on here. That's great. I love local libraries. They're such a treasure. So, culinary history. Let's dig in. You can go ahead and move that slide. So sometimes people ask, well, how did this book come about? Because, you know, at first blush, that topic, a few people looked at me like, culinary history? Iowa even has one? It came about because I believe you have to protect what you love. And I love the stories of Iowa history. I love our recipes that we have here. And 20 years of being an ag journalist have taught me that these stories just kind of disappear. Things just disappear if we don't protect them and put them in a little bit more of a fixed form. And even though I've done lots of newspaper and magazine writing and online writing through my career, none of those ever seemed quite permanent enough to me because newspapers decay and articles get thrown away. And so I like books because they are a permanent marker in a dry erase world. Nobody throws away a good book. And so my first one was Calhoun County. That's my home county. So I'm about 80 miles south of here. And I was flipping through that book one day. It came out in 2015. And I was just noticing, gosh, there's a lot of food pictures in this book. It wasn't intended to be a food book, but you can't tell Iowa history without telling food stories. So that's my hometown of Lake City in that picture. That is in the book. And that's Gunther's Grocery in 1912. And so that building is still standing. It's on the west side of the town square, if any of you have ever been through Lake City. It's right on 175. And look at that payload they've got there of flour. I don't know if that's 100 or 50-pound sacks of flour, but that's a whole lot of flour. That's Sam Rudinas on the dray wagon. So they would have taken those flour sacks off the railroad, off the train, hauled it up there to the grocery store. And it just speaks to the fact that our mothers, our grandmothers, our great-grandmas, and other ancestors, this was hardcore, old school, make it from scratch kind of cooking that they knew how to do. And I really wanted to honor that history. So like I said, some people thought that it was a little bit goofy when I proposed this idea of a culinary history book. I couldn't believe, first of all, no one had ever written a book about it. And, oh, hello, come on in. And so some people looked at me funny, like, Iowa has a culinary history? I said, sure it does. So when you think of Iowa food, there's no right or wrong answer, but when you're thinking what to you defines Iowa food, what springs to mind? What's that? There's a lot of fair food, yeah. Especially up here in the fine town of Spencer with the Clay County Fair. Anything? Pies, yes. Sweet corn. Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, we do have Iowa foods. Now, I told some group that we have the best sweet corn in the nation, and some lady from Illinois challenged me on that, but we still have the best sweet corn. I don't care what they say in Illinois. We love you in Illinois, but we have better sweet corn. I think this could be our state motto. Am I right? Yes. See, look, we even have cookies here tonight. We're going to eat tonight. Yet another picture from that first book. This intrigues me to no end because this is down southwest of Lake City on the Raccoon River. And this was the day before we had camping supply stores and Walmart and all these wonderful places. So you literally had to pack up your kitchen, including the table, including the tablecloth, the whole bit. You take it out there and they're camping. But the fact that they have a white tablecloth, does that not blow your mind? How many of you take a white tablecloth when you go to a picnic? No, I don't. But it just shows you how seriously Iowans have always taken their food. I don't. I am going to guess on, you want to back it up for just a minute? Thank you. You look at enough old pictures, you kind of get a sense of when it probably was. I'm going to guess by their hairstyles and their dress, it's circa 1910. Yep. And feel free, I tell people this isn't school. Jump in, ask questions, make comments. It's more fun than if you save everything for the end. Terrace Hill. I got to give this program at Terrace Hill in the parlor this winter. How cool is that? This program has taken me everywhere. I got to speak at the Surf Ballroom a few weeks ago too. All these Iowa legends. It's really cool. But it's fun to talk about Terrace Hill just because it's so wildly different than anything else in our culinary history. So that beautiful Second Empire style mansion was built in 1869 and truly a castle in the cornfields. Can you imagine how that must have just been so prominent on that hill in Des Moines all those years ago? Designed by a Chicago architect, and Benjamin Franklin Allen was the gentleman who built it. Back then it was $400,000, about $7 million today, and I'm not even sure you could really do it for $7 million today. But the fun part about the food angle of that is when you build a $7 million house, so what that it's 1869 and you're on the prairie, you still hire caterers from Chicago. You invite your friends, all your big time friends, over for dinner. You don't have dinner till 10 p.m. That's what they did on the gala dinner night that they had to have the housewarming party. And you do things like you have 25-pound fruit cakes. I don't like fruit cakes, so I don't want 25 pounds of it. I was more impressed with the big ice cream sculpture they talked about that was carved in the shape of George Washington. Kind of cool. So there's one little slice of our culinary history, but there's nothing else, go ahead, nothing else quite like it, but it's fun. So one of the things that really to me defines Iowa cooking is all these ethnic food traditions. And I think we have hung on to our food traditions, the ethnic ones, longer than just about any other state, is simply because we are a farming state. My family has a century farm in Calhoun County. We've been there since 1889. So farmers don't just pack up and move at the drop of the hat. We're such a mobile society today, but not so much for farmers. And so when you are rooted to the land, one of the things you tend to do is you hang on to those culinary traditions. And so everybody knows about the Dutch letters and Pella. Kolaches, a Czech Bohemian thing. You tend to see these a little bit more in northeast Iowa. The open-faced ones there, that was from a bakery in Marion called the Kettle House. But that you can also do them with what's called the diaper fold. So this is actually Pocahontas. I didn't realize until I did this book that Pocahontas has such a strong Czech Bohemian heritage. So that Catholic church there, it's now closed. But in June, this is the epicenter for hundreds and hundreds of these wonderful kolaches. And so you can go buy them. They literally make hundreds of them. They sell out within a matter of hours. But they're a sweet pastry. They've got all kinds of different fruit fillings, cherry, prune, poppy seed, apple. And a lot of people surprisingly like the prune ones the best. I've had them. They're very good. And this deal with Lorenz Marathon School, I found out that the Family and Consumer Sciences teacher there was using my book as a textbook. And I thought, how wonderful is that? I never dreamed of it being used as a textbook. It's kind of a combination recipe book and storybook. But she found out that it's a really good way to engage the kids, get them learning some of these recipes. They've baked kolaches, and then get them to dig into the history a little bit. So I kind of invited myself up to her classroom about a year ago. I said, could I come meet the kids and just share? I gave them a kind of an abridged version of this program. And those kids, it's a tough crowd, man, when you're working with junior high, middle school kids, because that picture I showed you of the campers on Raccoon River there, one of the kids said, so which one are you? Oh, jeez. Go ahead. German, I'm half German and half Irish, so you gotta love some good German cooking. So the Amana colonies, we're talking way back to the 1850s in east central Iowa. Those folks came out here from Ebenezer, New York. And in the 7 villages, they had all these different communal kitchens, because guess what? When you have a communal society, you have no need for your own kitchen in your own house because you eat together in these communal dining halls. And these ladies called kitchen bosses were the ones who planned the menus and who ran the gardens. And I read a memoir of a lady that grew up in the Amana colonies. And she talked about Tuesdays being leftover day. And they had something called pancake soup. And I thought, oh my goodness, that sounds terrible. Pancake soup? She said it wasn't good either. But now I'm reformed and I have a whole new view of pancake soup because I got to go on a cruise with Farm Bureau this winter, a Danube River cruise, and we were in Austria and we had pancake soup. They're really more like a cross between a pancake and a crepe, and they're rolled up and they're sliced down, kind of like you'd slice a cinnamon roll almost. There's little spiral pastries kind of sort of in the soup, and it's kind of a beefy broth, but surprisingly, it's very good. So I used to laugh about pancake soup. I do not laugh about pancake soup anymore. Now, the thing about these communal kitchens is they all went away by 1932 because we're in the midst of the Depression, and this communal society was just not working for the people of the Amanas, and they voted to have a capitalistic society. So they closed down all these communal kitchens. People started having their own kitchens. Go ahead. But there is one remaining, and it's in Middle Amana. It looks like that. You walk in the back door, and you feel like you're stepping back in time, truly. So my mom and I went to this communal kitchen dinner. This was the first one they had done in all those years. So we got to eat in the dining room. You can see it's a pretty Spartan, no-nonsense affair. But that's how those folks were. They went to church 12 times a week. So it was a no-nonsense, work-hard kind of culture. And we got to eat like a German, so good roast pork and sauerkraut, pickled everything. I've got my Amana wine. And you know what I find so funny today is everybody's talking about probiotics and prebiotics and gut health and all that. Well, guess what? It's called sauerkraut. Fermented food did the same thing for you. So it's just someone came up with a cool new name for it. Go ahead. Now, there were other Germans all over the state. Actually, Germans were by far the largest in terms of numbers immigrant group who settled in Iowa in the 19th and early 20th century. Now, these guys up in the Sioux City area were more of a light-hearted, fun-loving bunch of Germans, perhaps, than the ones in the Amana colonies. And we had a lot of beer brewers back in this state back in the day. So what's old is new. You know, this whole trend towards craft beer and microbreweries. Wow, that really had its roots in the 19th century. We had those microbreweries in Iowa City, Davenport, Dubuque, anywhere you had lots of Germans. Sioux City. Now, the problem for these folks is that Iowans decided to take a run at Prohibition long before they did at the national level. I didn't know that till I did this book. So as early as the 1880s, we had lawmakers putting Prohibition laws on the books. They'd put them on, they'd take them off, but then by 1916, there was a major push to make Iowa a dry state. And guess what? They got it done. Now, if you're a beer brewer, this is devastating because the lawmakers in Des Moines just told you you're out of business. They didn't take lightly to that up in Sioux City. So they figured, you know what? Sioux City is an awful long ways from Des Moines, especially in those days with poor roads and tough transportation. So they said, you know what? We're going to keep right on brewing our beer up here. And if you lawmakers don't like it, come stop us. And guess what? Des Moines left them alone. Go ahead. Now, if this isn't German inspired, I'm not sure what is. I think this could be our state sandwich, you know. Although I did have my first Wheezy Pleaser last fall. People looked at me like, you are so weird eating peanut butter on your burger. I said, it's good. Do you like them? Anybody here a big fan? No? So-so? Yeah. You got to have a claim to fame, right? So this is so much fun with the pork tenderloins because the Iowa pork producers, I don't know if you know this, but they have a pork tenderloin trail. You're probably well aware of the contest they have every year to find the best tenderloin in Iowa, which this was it in 2014. This is in Ogden at the Lucky Pig. Now, if you like to travel around the state and eat good food and just see new stuff, log on to the Iowa Pork Producers website because just Google for Iowa Pork Producers Pork Tenderloin Trail and you can download this nifty little passport. And if you go to 10 of the 14 restaurants listed on there and you get your passport stamped because you get your tenderloin, And then you send in your passport. They send you a really cool t-shirt that says, Iowa Pork Tenderloin Trail, done. I want the t-shirt. I haven't gotten it yet. But the German connection to me is that anybody who's ever had a Wiener Schnitzel, it tastes an awful lot like that. So a lot of times that is veal, but over here it tends to be pork tenderloin that's pounded out thin or maybe thick and fried up to a nice crisp consistency. So definitely some German roots. And if you've traveled at all, you probably are also well aware a breaded pork tenderloin, like we know them here, they're an I-state phenomenon. Indiana, Illinois, Iowa. And guess what? Why that is because we have lots of pigs here in those states and we have lots of Germans. So if you go to Florida, Oregon, other parts of the country, you will not see breaded pork tenderloins. Or if they attempt to do them, they're not nearly as good as an Iowa one. We're up in the part of the world where maybe you've heard of Archie's. Have you anybody heard of Archie's? Been to Archie's? Heard of it? I had never been there before I did the book. Wow, this place is a real treat. Oh, and I tell people I get no kickbacks from any of these restaurants. I just tell you these things because the stories are fun. So there is an ethnic connection here. It's actually Russian. So Archie Jackson, he's the gentleman on the left. He came from Russia, escaping the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917. And he ends up in Sioux City. And of course, at that time, the stockyards, the Sioux City stockyards were a big deal. And so he learned what made a good cut of beef from the hoof up because he was working at the stockyard. By 49, he opens his own restaurant in Lamar's, and that's Archie's. And here it is, all these years later, it's a third-generation family-owned restaurant. So his daughter Val ran it, then her son Bob. So there I am with Bob. Great steaks, great shrimp. I mean, my goodness. Sometimes people think you have to go to Chicago or Denver or New York to get a really great steak. Come to Lamar's because we grow an awful lot of cattle in this state. And when you're that close to some prime beef, you don't need to run off somewhere else to get a great steak. And other people have recognized this. So we always, here in rural Iowa, maybe don't understand what a big deal the James Beard Award is. It is huge in the food world. So there's people with tons of money and a love for food. They will jump in their private jet and they'll fly all over the country to eat at these James Beard Award winning places. So people come out here and they fly into either Omaha or Sioux City or Sioux Falls, and they rent a car and they go up there to Archie's. And because Bob has made all these contacts with some pretty high-level, well-to-do people in the food world, he now has interests in wineries in the Napa Valley of California. So he has one of the best wine lists in the Midwest at Archie's. Who knew, right? Go ahead. So it's getting close to summertime. It was 85 degrees. Let's talk about ice cream. Love ice cream. How many of you knew that Iowa is the birthplace of the Eskimo pie? Yeah. So Ottawa, way over on the west side of the state, which their other claim to fame is they have the widest main street of any town in America. But I can totally relate to the birthplace of this particular ice cream treat because Christian Nelson had this confectionery store back in 1920 in town. And allegedly a little boy came in there and he only had a nickel to spend. So he says, I want a candy bar. No, I want ice cream. No, I want a candy bar. So he's having this moral dilemma. Well, you couldn't have both in those days. And Mr. Nelson saw this and he thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could put candy on the ice cream? But chocolate coating and ice cream don't always play nice together naturally. So he learned how to fiddle around with some food chemistry and make it so the chocolate would stick to the ice cream, and hence the birth of the Eskimo pie. I love the advertising in the old days. It's not only refreshing and energizing, but there's magic in its flavor, and eat ice cream for health. I can do that. And then, of course, our other famous ice cream in this state. Actually, we have a lot of different kinds of ice cream in this state, but I think everybody knows about Blue Bunny. What people don't always know is the story behind the name Blue Bunny, because it's kind of an unusual name. So it actually, the whole thing just started as a local dairy. It was the Wells family who ran the the Wells Dairy. They had ice cream in 1925 after starting the dairy in 1913. And then by 1935, they had this Name That ice cream contest. And so this is where Blue Bunny enters the picture, because a gentleman who had a young child, there was a Blue Bunny in a store display window in Sioux City, and he just thought, well, my kid really likes that Blue Bunny, I'll enter the name in a contest. And he did, and he won, and he got 25 bucks, which doesn't sound like that much, but in the Depression years, that was about $450. And here we are all these years later with Blue Bunny ice cream. So they have over 1,100 different types of ice cream and novelty treats. Isn't that amazing? Go ahead. Anybody been to the Northwestern? Ooh, a few, all right. I love the Northwestern. That's coming up on its 100th anniversary, because we're talking 1920. Isn't it the best? And you know what's so funny is a lot of locals up there, it's dinky, isn't it? A lot of, oh, go ahead. Mason City. It's up, I'll tell you, because that's kind of an interesting part of the story. So it's a Greek heritage here, and it's up in the northwestern part of the city. So you feel like you're kind of out in this industrial area bordering a the lower middle class, just nice residential neighborhood. It's kind of sandwiched in between the two. And there's actually a reason why that is. It's because back in the day, when the car had been invented, we're building roads like crazy all over this country. Guess what? We want better roads, and so people are manufacturing Portland cement. This was one of the places. Mason City was a big manufacturer of cement. And so all those jobs mean we need lots of workers. So they were coming in droves from Europe, especially Eastern Europe, places like Greece. And at that time, the 19-teens, 1920s, nobody in that part of the world, in that part of Mason City, had a need for a high-end steakhouse, but what they did need was a working man's cafe. So that's how it started its life. And then yet again, another third-generation family-owned business. It's now a nice high-end steakhouse. But when I say high-end, it's still Iowa, so don't feel like you have to wear a suit and tie or anything like that. I should have told you with Archie's, to show you how Iowa Steakhouse keeps it real, you can still get Jell-O as a side dish. But this is just, the flavor's phenomenal, is it not? You do. Well, I know, it's so, I know, they're both really good. This is just, yeah, they broil these in oil, and then it's got a Greek seasoning on it that's just outstanding. And you can have all these wonderful side dishes. You got the Greek salad with the feta cheese and the olives. You can have the pasta, the spaghetti. Now that actually is a Greek thing. I had someone ask me once, well, spaghetti, that's an Italian thing. It is, but if it has red sauce. When you do it this way, where it's olive oil and garlic and some grated cheese on top, that's more of a Greek thing. It sounds weird to eat that as a side dish with your steak, but it's very good. So I encourage you to try that. And like you said, it's very tiny in there, but it is packed constantly. So, not really. It's kind of more of a weekend deal and evenings. And so yes, get there early. Or if you do, I think they do take reservations for smaller parties, but the way they explained it to me, you don't set the time. You call for a reservation and they'll say, okay, we can get you in at 8:30. And you just roll with it. All right. And then there's Maid-Rites. These aren't really an ethnic thing, but it's a funny thing about Maid-Rites, because on the odd times that some national writer calls me and wants to do a food story, like USA Today, they'll periodically do the 50 foods of the 50 states. Without fail, they think that Iowa eats Maid-Rites constantly. And I guess in some ways we do eat a lot of them, because I counted up one day with a friend, I think there's about 6 different names we came up with for what Iowans call a loose meat sandwich. So there's loose meat, there's Maid-Rites, there's Hoppy Joe's. If you're in Ottumwa, they call them canteens. I've heard them called beef burgers, and then we came up with one other. Taverns, yes, yes. See, a lot of people in other parts of the state have never heard of taverns. And then I just was giving this talk in Davenport a few weeks ago, and a lady that was from central southern Illinois, she said, well, we call those yip-yips. So see, there's another one. Add to, we're up to 7, I think, now named Yip Yips. Isn't that funny? So, and the thing is, a true Maid-Rite is not a sloppy Joe, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So this sandwich was invented in 1926 in Muscatine. Think about that. That's almost 100 years ago. And the story goes that there was a butcher named Fred Angel, and he was experimenting with some different cuts, some very fine cuts, grains of beef, and he seasons up this sandwich and he shares it with a buddy, and the buddy allegedly says, "Fred, that sandwich is made right." So, and the difference between a Maid-Rite and a sloppy Joe is that the sloppies have ketchup, mustard, brown sugar, that type of stuff in it to make it sloppy, whereas a true Maid-Rite is just the steamed meat, the loose meat, maybe with some salt and pepper on it, and that's about it.
Mustard.
Mustard, yeah.
There used to be one in Mason City, and I always
Still
thought
is.
that was the one that,
That's not Maid-Rite brand or franchise, but that's Bob's.
Bob's Maid-Rites, isn't it?
No, it's Bob's
Just
Pro
Bob's.
Shop.
But I always thought they were the first ones to do it.
No,
But
there was one here in
they,
Spencer a long time ago.
yeah, there was, but you had to put mustard on it, and you could have pickles, but boy, you had to ask special for that.
I know, and then some of them, until recently, they kind of banned ketchup. You couldn't even get ketchup in the restaurant. Some of them have relaxed the rules now on that.
I always thought Newton was where it originated.
Nope, actually Muscatine. Yep, I called the owner of the company just to verify, and yep, it's funny because there's a lot of misinformation about where they actually started, so that's a common question.
So is Maid-Rite is it a franchise?
It is a franchise, and there's only, you can advance the slide, thank you. I've got on there's 38. That's not correct. It's actually more like 36 or 35 because it seems like every year that I do this program we lose 1 or 2. But no, they're actually in some other, about 8 Midwestern states. But it's weird because as much as people associate Maid-Rites with this state, it's really hard to find an authentic Maid-Rite restaurant. I think it's much easier to find breaded pork tenderloins. They're in every little bar and restaurant all over the place, but an authentic Maid-Rite.
Yeah. What's that?
Peterson, Iowa. We just had one this week.
Really?
And they're in the contest too.
Yes.
That's a good restaurant in
Peterson,
What's
Iowa.
it
No, it's
called?
not a
It's
restaurant.
the
It's the gas station.
Oh, it's the gas
what?
station.
Okay, the
What's
convenience
the,
store
what are
gas
they doing the
station.
thing for?
For the best pork tenderloin.
Tenderloin? Oh.
See, that's what I love about Iowa. You can find the best food in a gas station sometimes. Who knew?
It was kind of a neat story.
Here.
Go ahead and tell it.
Oh, we went in and we ordered one, and the gal said that the manager mixes up the spices and everything, and she will not let them back there.
Oh, really? It's top secret, huh?
One time, and she told her to go out front, and she tenderizes them. They can't tenderize them. and It's from pork loin. She
Is
cuts
that the
them.
one that's on the corner?
Yeah. Just
There?
there.
Yeah, that.
So you should go there.
Well,
It's not really breaded,
Right?
but it's
Wonderful.
it's really good.
And 2 people can eat one. I mean, you can get,
That's a true Iowa. You know, we make them so ridiculously big. They're like a hubcap, you know, it covers the plate, and then you have the little obligatory bun.
Yeah.
Well, I do get up that way a fair amount, so I'm going to stop in there. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So, yeah, the cool thing about Maid-Rite, too, is that we think of a McDonald's, something like that, setting the standard for what a quick-serve restaurant, fast food restaurant is. Maid-Rite figured that out a long time before McDonald's did. McDonald's was a post-war World War II thing. We're going back to the 1920s for this. So, anybody know where Taylor's Maid-Rite is? It is, yes. So that's a 3rd-generation family-owned business that's a Maid-Rite, and they were, I believe, the 2nd franchisee in the state. So I think their roots go back to 1928. It was really fantastic. I gave this program in Marshalltown in April, and lo and behold, the lady that owns the Maid-Rite was in my group, and she comes up to me afterwards and says, "Would you come to my restaurant? I'd love to treat you to a Maid-Rite before you leave town." So of course I said yes, and she gave me everything. I walked out, I was eating a Maid-Rite, I had a milkshake, a Dutch apple pie. I need a gym is what I need. It was so fun though, and Iowans are so gracious. Go ahead. Any Scandinavians in the room? Oh yeah. So look at her apron. Is that not fun? Lutheran Jello power. So this is at Callender, which is a little town just outside of Fort Dodge, and the first December of every Christmas time, first Saturday in December. So Christmas time, they do their big potluck, bake sale, Norwegian cooking, and you get all the good stuff, the kringle, the lefse, the krumkake. And it's fun to eat all that. A lot of that stuff isn't hard to make, but it's just time consuming. So we don't always have cooks making it a lot anymore. Go ahead. Now there is a dark side to Scandinavian cooking. I am finding out that kids have no idea what lutefisk is, and sometimes I assume that every adult knows what it is, but I have a surprising number of people that show up in these programs that are not native Iowans, so they don't know what on earth, they're not even Midwesterners, so they look at me like, well, what is this? I said, I'm glad you asked, because it's really a neat story about most of our roots. Most of us did not come from royalty, I'm assuming. We had ancestors who immigrated here from somewhere else seeking a better life, and a lot of times that meant they were not flush with cash. And so if you had to either take food with you on a long journey, or you have to stretch your food dollar as far as you can, let's say you are trying to preserve food, or you're trying to salvage some stuff before it goes bad. Well, if you have codfish, what you can do is you can dry out the codfish, and then when you're ready to eat it, you reconstitute it with water and lye. You rinse off the lye. By that point, your fish has kind of a weird, rubbery, kind of jello texture, but that's okay. It has a very distinctive taste. You slather it with butter, and the people that like lutefisk go nuts for lutefisk. And when you're this close to Minnesota, the further north you go in Iowa, the more you get towards Minnesota, there's more lutefisk dinners that appear, usually around November. This one was at Badger, north of Fort Dodge. And it was so crazy that night that you had to wait. I mean, there was this huge line outside the church. So you either love lutefisk or you hate it. And at least these Norwegians in Badger have a good sense of humor. His t-shirt says, lutefisk, the piece of cod that passes all understanding. That's good, isn't it? So if lutefisk is not your cup of tea, that's okay. Most people like Italian food. And we do have Italian heritage in this state, which is fun. So has anybody ever had Graziano's sausage? You are very well traveled, culinarily wise.
I lived in Des Moines for many years.
Aha, yes, it's definitely a Des Moines thing. So on South Union Street, south side of Des Moines, the crazy thing to me is if you showed up there today, other than the fact the guys wouldn't be dressed like that, it looks just like that outside. They have totally preserved the building and the painting, everything. And so this deal is, there were two Italian brothers in the late 1800s. Times were tough in Italy, like it was in so many parts of Europe. So the family put these two teenagers who were about 14 and 16, put them on an immigrant ship by themselves and sent them off to America. Can you imagine now, you look at a 14 and a 16-year-old? But times were different then. They struck out on their own. They make it to Iowa. They get jobs on the railroad. And it was honest work, but it was hard work. And they decided, we don't want to do this forever. So the one brother managed to save enough money to open a grocery store in Des Moines. And it really takes off. So the other brother comes into the business. And now those brothers, their granddaughter, Frances, runs the business. So yet another third generation, family-owned business. And the Graziano sausage is just a wonderful Des Moines tradition. Although it's getting easier to find. I bet if you went to your local Hy-Vee, for example, a lot of times they can get some of these products through their warehouse. So just because you aren't close to Des Moines doesn't mean you can't get some of these Iowa foods. Go ahead. It's fun to talk about the famous people that have some ties to our culinary history. Go ahead. Laura Ingalls, I think most people now are pretty well aware that she has an Iowa tie. I mean, she did get carved in butter at the Iowa State Fair this year, which I'm pretty sure now is the highest honor we can give any Iowan, is carving them in butter at the fair. But she lived in Burr Oak, Iowa, which is in northeast Iowa, practically Minnesota, right up above Decorah, not too far. They suspect that the reason Laura didn't write about her time in Iowa in her Little House books is because it was really kind of a sad time in her life. So to set the stage, in the 1870s, her family was up in Walnut Grove, Minnesota, and this was a time when grasshopper plagues were destroying everything. They were destroying crops here, they were destroying crops in southern Minnesota, and that's a really bad combination when you have a young growing family and you need money and your crops are destroyed. So fortunately, Pa had a buddy that ran this Masters Hotel in Burr Oak, and the buddy says, don't worry about it, come down here, you run the hotel, you can live here, Ma can cook in the kitchen below, it'll be good. It was good for 9 months, but then that gentleman quit paying them. And so they went back to Walnut Grove. So next slide. I'll show you what the place looks like. They have preserved this building. It's still on the original site. So down in the basement you can see some of the book, all the different languages the books have been translated into. You can see some interesting stuff down there. And Ma Ingalls' butter cookie recipe is in the book. And I tell people this is where I'll give you some cooking tips. And this is a nice recipe, especially if you have a new baker or a beginning baker, or just you're like me and you live in the country, or you just don't have time to run to the grocery store and you need to whip up a batch of cookies. You probably have the ingredients in your kitchen. Although I'm finding out that in this younger generation, a lot of them don't cook at all, so things that I thought everybody would have in their kitchen, like flour and sugar and a few basic spices, no. If it's not a throw it in the microwave, heat it up kind of food, they don't have it. So, well, this is even more appropriate. So when they want to learn how to bake, this is easy. So one thing that you need to do with any baked good is it always talks about creaming the butter and sugar, right? And so most people do not cream the butter and sugar long enough. You actually want that butter to look a little bit white by the time it's done. What you're trying to do is incorporate air into the mix, and that will help make a lighter, fluffier baked good. The other thing I tell people, I'm a big fan of butter. I don't normally cook with margarine. The thing about margarine is if you cook with it, just be sure that you get the one that has the high level of vegetable oil in it, vegetable fat, because if it's not at least 70% vegetable oil, there's water making up the difference. And so you can imagine when all this starts melting during the baking process, if you have a lot of water, it's going to screw up the texture of your baked good. So there's a couple simple tips to help you out with your baking. I think most people know that Herbert Hoover is our only president from Iowa. Why we don't do a better job in the state of teaching history, I don't know, because if people know who he is, they tend to think, well, he's the guy that started the Depression. You could debate that all day. But the part of the story that doesn't get told is what he did to help Belgium in World War I. So right at this time period, if we went back 100 years ago, World War I was just tearing Europe apart. And you think about where Belgium was. You did not want to be in Belgium in 1916, 1917, 1918. Because let's just imagine a map here. So if Belgium's right here, we've got England over here, we've got France here, we've got Germany back here, and you're this little chunk of land, but you're right in the middle where you don't want to be. So you're already little, you can't grow much food, and then you've got troops that are fighting all around you, so they cut off all your supplies. The people of Belgium were just literally starving, especially the kids. And Hoover sees this, and what I admire about his story is that he didn't just say, oh gosh, someone else should do something about that. He took action, and he was in a position to do so because even though he had been born in Iowa and was orphaned at a pretty early age, he had moved out to California and grew up out there, and he was one of the first graduates of Stanford University. Talk about a guy in the right time at the right place, and he picked a really good college major. He was a mining engineer, and so that career took him all over the world. He went to China and all over the place, and he was pretty much a self-made millionaire by the time he was 40. So when World War I breaks out, he not only recognized this dire need, but he had money and he had political connections, and he said, let's do something about this. So he formed this relief council to send food to Europe, specifically Belgium. And to this day, the people of Belgium most certainly know who Herbert Hoover was. So that's something to be proud of. Has anybody been to the Hotel Julie in Dubuque? You have. I love it. You can give this program. I'm going to turn it over to you. That's a cool place, isn't it?
We just visited
We
there
just-
this
oh, good.
this last summer.
Oh,
Went there.
excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of through a dart, and that's where it landed.
I love it. That's great. Well, there has been a hotel on that site since 1839. Iowa was not even a state at that point. Anybody know when Iowa became a state? December 28, 1846. So you can see that settlers could not wait to get their hands on Iowa land, and they needed a place to stay. Now, this was not there in 1839. This actually came about in 1915, but it had replaced an earlier hotel that burned down. What's neat about this particular hotel, there's actually a few things, but there are not many boutique hotels in this whole country left. The independently owned, having their own kind of story. Most of them are chains and Super 8s and Americans and stuff like that. Nothing wrong with that, but these hotels that have so much character are fun. You maybe noticed that there is a restaurant, if you've been there, there's a restaurant on the ground floor called Caroline's. Well, I want to introduce you to Caroline. There she is, Caroline Romberg Fisher. Now, it would be good enough just to know that Caroline's restaurant has this amazing thing at breakfast called banana bread French toast. Is that not brilliant, making French toast out of banana bread? Very good. But Caroline is a very compelling character. It's actually her descendants who own the hotel. And Caroline's story starts in the late 1800s. And at that time, to have any sort of role in life, you had to be married if you were a woman. Most women didn't get a lot of education. Your job was to get married and have children. And she did. The only problem was that when her husband he ran an ice cutting business in Dubuque, which was very important in those days before electricity. Life was good until he fell in the Mississippi River one winter and drowned while he was cutting ice. Well, what do you do when you're about 34 years old, you've got 4 or 5 young kids at home, and your husband's deceased? There's no social safety net. You have no training for anything. She did the only thing she could do. She took over the business. And things were okay until she finds out that there were some shenanigans going on behind the scenes. So, you know, I talked about those German brewers that were in places like Dubuque. Well, there were also a lot of taverns in Dubuque, which was good for her business, except she finds out that her drivers were basically accepting bribes from some of the tavern owners. Tavern owner would say, hey man, if you give me some free ice, I'll give you a free drink. And you can see how this spirals down quickly. So the drivers are getting drunk, she's losing money, and she literally had to take the reins of the ice wagon and get the driver home, get the business straightened out. But she did, and she made a go of it. Truly a woman ahead of her time. Now there is another non-culinary tie to this hotel, Al Capone. I'm also finding out some of the young kids don't know who Al Capone is. So. But did any of you who've been there, did you get to see the Capone suite on the 2nd floor? That is cool. There wasn't anybody staying in it when I was there. So that is the most luxurious suite I have ever seen. It was just fantastic. So the deal with Capone is that when the heat would get a little bit too much out in Chicago, guess what? He and his henchmen are going to flee across the Mississippi River. They rent out the upper floors on this hotel because you got to have a good lookout, right, if the feds are coming after you. And they think that he even had financial interests in this hotel at one time. But believe it or not, gangsters just don't keep very good records. So we can't prove it. But there is the Capone suite, and it's very cool. Go ahead. Does anybody know the story of the radio homemakers? These gals, yeah, yes, those are the ones. And so these are Martha Stewart before there was Martha Stewart. Kind of like the story I just told you, women ahead of their time. So in 1920, what was the big hot new technology? Radio, actually. Yep. And so at that time, you got to remember, most of Iowa, we're still a rural state. Most people still lived on farms. This is the era, of course, before good roads, TV, And that means a lot of times, Mrs. Farm Wife, you're stuck on a farm quite a bit because you've got a tremendous amount of work to do. And if the roads are mud, guess what? You're not going to town anytime soon. It can be a kind of a lonely, depressing life sometimes. And then radio comes along. Hallelujah. There's all kinds of new opportunities. And there were two savvy gentlemen down in Shenandoah, Iowa that picked up on this right away. I know you've heard their names. It was Earl May and Henry Field. So they're running nursery and garden centers down there, and that's a great time and a great place to be in that business because we still have most people living on farms. They need the plants and the seeds and all that nursery stock. And so these guys are pretty tough competitors, and they both seize on radio as a way to grow their business. And the only catch is that when you're a busy businessman, you can't be on the radio all day long. So they would do some broadcasting, but then they got wise and they said, geez, if we could just be out there more and more, we could get more business, but who is going to spread our message? Hey, they've got wives, sisters, mothers, and they start recruiting these ladies, and they said, guess what? You're going to do a radio show. Women freaked out. They said, I don't know anything about a radio show. Don't worry, nobody does. Just get on there and talk about what you do all day. So you can see they literally broadcast from their kitchens. They talked about things like what they were cooking for supper. They'd walk you through the recipe bit by bit. They would talk about home decor, child rearing, cleaning tips, anything related to running a household, just like Martha Stewart. And they became wildly popular. It was called Neighboring on the Air, and women all over the Midwest just loved these radio shows. So Evelyn Birkby, Down a Country Road, that was her show. She is still alive. I would love to meet her. She's way down in southwest Iowa. I think she's about 98 or 99 years old. A lot of these shows lasted, or at least some of them did, till the 1990s. And by about the 50s or so, I've got to show you something here, because has anybody ever heard of Kitchen Clatter? Yeah. These are the women behind Kitchen Clatter. So they had a magazine. So that was something you could buy 12 issues a year for $1. And then they had all their recipes in the magazine, and they were savvy, smart women, because they didn't just say, hey, if you're baking our cake, just use any old imitation orange flavor. Use Kitchen Clatter. So they had all these lines of products, too. And they did very well for themselves. Yes. Oh, sure. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Jello. I know. Isn't that the best? It is. Oh, it really is. I want to make some now. When this slide came up at my program in Villisca, they actually applauded, like, ah! So that was fun. But no, I actually agonized over what Jello recipe. We got to talk about Jello because we're Iowans. We eat a lot of Jello. But Jello can get weird really fast depending on what you put in it. So I thought, okay, this is something I think everybody likes. But I made the mistake on Facebook when I was photographing this and talking about it. I said, I made strawberry pretzel dessert today. Because I thought, well, I know everybody calls it a salad, but honestly, it's more of a dessert. My Facebook friends let me know, Prano, you do not call that dessert. That's a salad. And I said, only in Iowa would something with that much cream and sugar and butter and all that ever pass as a salad. Thank you. I know if you go to, like, my friends in New York and elsewhere, they say, ooh, Jello, that's hospital food. Or not in Iowa. Go ahead. So just to keep you on your toes, what Iowa city consumed the most Jello per capita in 1999, beating out our evil arch rival of Salt Lake City? And this is legit. You're a smart audience. Most people get screwed up on that and they say Sioux City. It is Des Moines. So Preston Daniels was the mayor at the time, and he issued a press release, oh, we're so proud to be the Jello capital. And when I gave this program last summer in West Des Moines, there was actually a lady that had been to Preston Daniels' New Year's Eve party that year. And remember, that was the whole Y2K, the 99 into 2000, the whole world's going to end because the computers are going to blow up. And I guess the way Preston Daniels decided to usher in the new year, he gave all those guests not a Jello shot, Someone said that in another group too. Yeah, he actually gave them Jell-O molds as their party favor that year. So there you go. Now it did get kind of weird in the 60s. Does anybody remember seeing those?
They would have been good.
60s?
We put celery and mixed
Yes.
vegetables and stuff in it, but I've never seen that.
Yeah, I don't think those flavors lasted. Yeah. Now someone in my group said, well, seasoned tomato, that's like an aspic. It is. So I said, yeah, if we think this through, okay, before the 1890s when Kraft invented powdered gelatin, nobody, unless you were royalty, was eating Jell-O or gelatin, because when you think of what it took to get the gelatin, first of all, you had to have land so that you could have livestock, and then you'd have to know how to process the livestock to get the gelatin. It was just a lot of work, and so really, unless you were well-to-do, nobody was serving a lot of aspics and gelatin products. And then that little box for pennies on the dollar changed everything, as did commercial refrigeration at the turn of the century. But you could argue, just like we've got this royal wedding coming up, even though we laugh about Jell-O being kind of cheap and lowbrow sometimes, back in the day, that would have been a very high-class meal that would have been most appropriate for the highest echelons. So I guess you could say Jell-O is the food of kings. Go ahead. Anybody up here familiar with Sturzings? I had not heard of Sturzings. You know a little bit about them? Oh, well, they're a big deal in Burlington. Oh, yeah. Yep, and it's okay if you don't know about them because they only really focus on a 60-mile radius around Burlington. So the deal with Sturzings, they are the only potato chip made in Iowa. We used to have the Highland Potato Chip Company in Des Moines, but that's been out of business for a while now. And so the roots of the Sturzings go back to the 30s. There was a guy that was a candy maker in Burlington, and you know how hot and humid it gets in the summer in Iowa. Well, you can't make chocolate candies too well in the summer back in that era. And he thought, well, I need an income, and what can I make? And, well, potato chips, that's a snack food. So he gets into the potato chip business. What makes a Sturzing is not only that they're still produced in these small artisan batches of just small quantities, but they are fried in soybean oil. No other potato chip is fried in soybean oil. Lay's, all the big boys, they use canola oil and products like that. So I'm finding out that people either love Sturzings or they hate them, but most people seem to like them, and they have a huge cult following, don't they, in southeast Iowa?
They're light tasting. They're a little greasier tasting, but they're light.
They're light, yes. They're like no other potato chip you've ever had. If you ever get the chance to try one, I recommend it. And they really got a big boost in the Vietnam War of all times because as our boys were being shipped overseas, people in that Burlington area said, our sons want a taste of home. Would you ship the potato chips? And they said, I guess. We've never really done that, but okay. And they did, and now they have this crazy, wild mail order business. People, especially at the holidays, people just buy Sturzings like crazy, and they go all over the country. Go ahead. I like the Lincoln Highway, Highway 30, because I'm a little bit closer to it down where I'm at but than you are. But that, if you've ever driven on an interstate, you know about the Lincoln Highway.
I have, Nyland's Cafe has a motel, and I have reservations there for Memorial Day weekend.
Oh, lucky you. Well, you might not want to hear my ghost story then. We'll talk about you can tell me in a minute if you want to hear my ghost story. But if anybody's ever driven on an interstate, we all owe it to this wonderful Lincoln Highway, which is now Highway 30, because this was the first transcontinental roadway. Went from Times Square in New York City all the way out to San Francisco, and guess what? It cut right across Iowa. And this was kind of back in the day, long before Casey's and all these hotels and whatnot. So places like Kronk's Cafe, you needed these places along the route so that people could get food and get refreshed. That's in Denison. That's a big deal in my part of the world. They're known for their pie. Nyland's that you're talking about, I love that place. They are such a treasure. So they were like the trifecta of what a rest stop would have been on the Lincoln Highway back in the day. They're extra special because not only were, and first I'm going to back up. In case you don't know where Colo is, we're talking Story County. We're not too far northeast of Ames. So little town northeast of Ames. Yep. And not only are they on the Lincoln Highway, but guess what? They're right at the junction of the Jefferson Highway. It's lesser known, but it's a big deal in its own right. They called it the Pine to Palms route, New Orleans to Winnipeg. So when you're right at this juncture of two major highways back in the day, if you had a cafe and a gas station and the motor court, like you're talking about, the little cabins, you had everything a road tripper would need. And all that stuff is still there. Now, the gas station's more of a museum. You can't fill up there, but it's cool. You can eat in the restaurant, and they've got a little Lincoln Highway, Pine to Palms Highway museum right in the next room here. Homemade pie, homemade ham and bean soup, those are their claims to fame there. And then they've got the little motor cabins, like the individual little cabins where you can stay for cheap if you want a place to stay for the night. Do you want to hear my ghost story, or will that scare you off? Okay. So when I did the book, at the very end of the interview, Sandy, who owns the whole complex there, she says, oh, by the way, we're haunted. And it's like, okay, you can't tell me that, and I'm just going to walk out the door and say, oh, okay, have a good night. I said, tell me more. And she said, well, there's just weird stuff that happens here sometimes, especially with new staff, new waitresses. Something likes to fiddle with their apron strings. And the on-off sign, the neon on-off sign in the window back there, it just randomly turns on and off sometimes. And the weirdest thing to me is that she said, yeah, if you go through the back to the kitchen there's a hand washing station, and there's a paper towel dispenser. And you've all seen the ones with the infrared light, wave your hand, it spits out a paper towel. Well, that's how it's supposed to work, but it doesn't exactly work like that at Nyland's because it just randomly spits out paper towels when nobody's around. And you think, well, it's just mechanical error, right? They've torn that thing apart, they've looked at it, it works fine. It shouldn't be spitting out paper towels when no one's there waving their hand. And they've actually had ghost hunters come in there and do a lockdown, and they have found evidence of something a little odd in there. And I said, Sandy, if you ever bring the ghost hunters back, would you call me? And I thought, oh, she never will. It's not going to happen. She called last September, and she said, we're bringing the ghost hunters back. Do you want to come down? And she fixed me up in her room in one of those little motor cabins. And so at 9 o'clock that one Friday night at the end of September, I got to be part of a paranormal lockdown, my very first one. Who knew, from food writing, the stuff you get to do. And so they brought in all the gear. At first I wanted to know, what does a ghost hunter in Iowa look like? I mean, are they totally weird-looking people, bizarre, strange? No, these are people that have normal day jobs. They work in computers, they work in healthcare, they just happen to hunt ghosts at night. So they bring in all the cameras and the recording devices, and even the staff didn't know we were going to do this because Sandy didn't want anybody doing anything that would influence or plant ideas in people's heads, and so we just sat around and observed the devices, and they had a device where you could, I don't know how to describe it, it's like you could hear voices sometimes coming from somewhere. And to me it's like an old-fashioned radio where you turn the dial and there's a lot of static, but then when you hit a radio station it comes in clear. That's kind of what this device was doing. And all of a sudden you'd hear static, and then you'd hear a voice saying, sometimes we couldn't understand it, but then other stuff was clear as a bell. So, and then all of a sudden, Davy Crockett, just that little snippet of that Davy Crockett song came through. It was so strange. And then the ghost hunters start talking to, asking questions. Would anyone here tonight like to talk to us? And there were voices that talked back to us. And they said, would you like to talk to them? And I said, okay. I said, would anybody, this was when we were back in the kitchen, I said, would anybody like to talk to me tonight? And clear as a bell, this very deep, resonant male voice came through, and it said, no. Oh, I was mad at that point. I'm a reporter, I'm a writer, I want to talk to you. No. I was rejected by a male ghost, and I've never quite gotten over it. But, you know, I don't know what's going on there exactly. And I've asked Sandy, I said, do you think any of this is malicious? No, it's not malicious. So don't be afraid to go there. And most of the time, nothing's even going to happen. You know, we were there for probably 6 hours that night, and most of the time, nothing was even going on. So it's nothing to be afraid of. It's just weird, and there is something going on there. So it's kind of intriguing. They did, because the first time the ghost hunters were there, and they played the audio file for me, clear as a bell, you could hear this person say, Tressa Vaughn, Tressa Vaughn. And nobody there knew anybody named Tressa Vaughn, and they tried to go through the history and figure out, well, would Tressa Vaughn have been a waitress here, or did she own the place at some time? They can't find any record of Tressa Vaughn. But
Maybe it has something to do with before, never.
could be. Could be. Yeah, because this wouldn't have come about till about the 1920s, and so there was, yeah, yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, you never know what you're going to get into with food writing. It's just kind of your typical small town cafe. So they've got soup and sandwiches, and they have wonderful breakfast with the hash browns and the scrambled eggs and bacon and all that stuff. Sandy bakes the pies every morning. She does. Yep. Really good ham and bean soup.
Going there.
Well, my hometown is State Center, and when I go visit family, that's where I stay. I've stayed there many, many times through the years.
And those little cabins, she just redid them not too long ago. They're tiny, but they're very nice, very clean. They're cheap. They're pretty cool. Yes, Sandy is fantastic. I really like Sandy. So tell her hi if you see her. Good. All right, Better Homes and Gardens Test Kitchen. We're in the home stretch because it's kind of fun to talk about things that are just exclusive to Iowa and Des Moines. And one of them is the Better Homes and Gardens Test Kitchen. We all know the famous red and white checkered cookbook. That's the only place it's ever been published is in Des Moines since 1930, and the test kitchen has been there since the 20s. And you can see they use an awful lot of stuff every year. Go ahead. How many of you knew that Anderson Erickson Dairy out of Des Moines was the first dairy in the country to put the missing kids on the milk cartons? Yeah. Sadly, it did nothing to bring back Johnny Gosh or Eugene Martin, but it was a good try. Anybody here remember any of the tea rooms that used to be around? Sioux City. There was a Yonkers in Sioux City, is that right, that had a tea room? Yeah. And I believe Waterloo had one, Des Moines had one. These were a big deal back in the day. And you know, kids today, it's really interesting to give this program to kids because you kind of have to explain what a department store was. I mean, look, we're losing all our stores. The JCPenney's, Yonkers is all closing. Geez, it's hard to find any of these anymore. Yeah, we got Walmart and Amazon. Yes, you still have a Penny's here, don't you? You're lucky. So yeah, the whole tea room and the department store phenomenon just went wild in the 1890s. And so Des Moines was actually a little late to the game with theirs opening in 1913. But they were special because theirs lasted longer than just about anybody, other department store's tea room in the whole country. 2005, I remember being in this place when I was living and working in Des Moines around that time. So you can see very elegant, white tablecloth, upscale, but yet it was never so expensive that only the well-to-do could go there. You just had to dress up and use good manners. And they were known for things like rare bits and sticky buns and things like that. That's how I remember it looking. Go ahead. Now I gotta know, up here in Spencer, are you all familiar with chili and cinnamon rolls for school lunch? Okay, I thought everybody in the world knew about chili and cinnamon rolls. Man, I go to other parts of the state and they look at me like I've got horns growing out of my head. Yeah, and back home, Lake City, East Sac, all those schools, they still have this, and the teachers assure me this is the kids' favorite meal. I had a friend from Minnesota just freak out over this. She said, that is disgusting. That makes no sense. That's like serving scrambled eggs and birthday cake together. I said, no, it's good. It's good. And so in my high school, we always had caramel rolls rather than cinnamon rolls. And I just oh my goodness, I craved that. I wanted the taste of those caramel rolls, but I thought, oh shoot, all those ladies, they were retired farm wives, they've all passed on now, the ones that were my school cooks. You know, these were the get up at dark 30 and make stuff from scratch, none of the just throwing it in the microwave business. But the caramel rolls, lo and behold, we can all be grateful that my neighbor Jerry Sliceman is the keeper of the roll recipe. He's a farmer and he's the most unlikely guy to be a baker, but he had a knee replacement a few years ago and he was hanging around the house that winter. His mom Lorraine was still alive. She was one of my school cooks. And Lorraine was just a go-getter. She made caramel rolls and all that stuff well into her 80s. So she'd be baking up a storm, and Jerry would hang around there. And he kind of learned how to make, he kind of took an interest, learns how to make all this. And now he's this master baker, and we can all be glad that he shared his recipe. It's in the book, and it's fantastic. You can do 3 different things with it. You can make caramel rolls, cinnamon rolls, or really awesome hamburger buns. And you know what the secret is to a really good dough like this? It's old school, it's farm cooking, it's mashed potatoes. So what you do is you peel the potatoes and you dice up the potatoes and you put them in boiling water and you get the potatoes nice and mashable, but then you want to save the water, the starch in the water. You know, save the potato water, you mix all this, the mashed potatoes into the dough, and you'll never taste them. But it just changes the texture of the dough. It's so tender, it's so moist, it's delicious. And he's such a snob, a baking snob now. He's a potato snob. He says, you know, you don't want russets, you want Yukon Golds. And he's right. Go ahead. Wine. What's old is new, and that's true with wine. Where was the first commercial vineyard planted, or excuse me, when was the first commercial vineyard planted in Iowa? Any guesses? Actually 1857 in Council Bluffs. Isn't that amazing? Go ahead. So there's one of my favorite rosés on my kitchen table. We have about 100 wineries. It kind of varies, but that's about what it hovers around. And go ahead. Now before we go, I just wanted to let you know that some things can be set in stone, and that includes Mom's Christmas cookie recipe. You know, that's in the Cascade Cemetery. I saw that on Facebook, and as a trained journalist, my first thought was, is this real or is this a hoax? So I called the family. I said, is this the real deal? They said, oh yes, that's very real. That's our mother's tombstone. I said, can I use the picture? Yes, you can. I said, what's the story behind this? And they said, well, we just loved our mother so much that we wanted a special way to honor her when she passed. And she loved to bake. We love these cookies. We still make them every year with the kids and the grandkids. And we thought, what a wonderful way to honor Mom by putting the Christmas cookie recipe on her tombstone. So that is one way to take a recipe to the grave. Cascade over in eastern Iowa. Go ahead. So this is just my latest book that came out. So. Yeah, so I can't quit talking about food. See, we've even got Drew's chocolates in there. So I'm just obsessed with food. So I encourage you to go out and explore our great state, just like you do. I mean, throw a dart at the map or whatever works for you and go explore, and you can see, you can taste the world right between the borders of Iowa. Fun places to go visit. I hope we can stay in touch, and thank you for being here tonight. You're a great audience, and keep supporting your local library. You're welcome.